Ravenstone was always the kind of place where people felt safe, but every town has secrets, and this one was hiding more than anyone could have imagined. All of it centered on that old bank, abandoned, decaying, and locked away. I'd heard the rumors, but as a detective, I had to know the truth. I stood outside the bank. It was like the town had frozen the day this place closed. Dust-covered counters, broken light fixtures, a faint smell of mildew. But something about it felt wrong, as if I was stepping into more than just an empty building. The bank hadn't been touched in years, yet I could feel that something was watching. Every sound, every shadow seemed alive, carrying the weight of past secrets. I found the bank's old photo. It revealed the early days as a trusted institution in the town. It was built in the roaring 1920s. Ravenstone Savings Bank was the pride of the town. People trusted it with their life savings, their futures. But in 1978, it shut down overnight. No explanations, no farewells, just locked doors and abandoned accounts. I found an old newspaper clipping about the bank's closing, showing cryptic articles that don't explain the shutdown. Articles hinted at financial instability and ownership changes, but they avoided the real questions. Why would a profitable bank suddenly close? And where did all its money go? The ledgers were half empty, with names and dates scratched out, pages missing and numbers that didn't add up. These weren't just errors. It looked intentional, like someone was erasing the bank's story piece by piece. Then I found something strange. Records of late-night appointments with clients whose names didn't belong in Ravenstone. These weren't the town's farmers and shopkeepers. These were strangers, coming in at odd hours. But why? Whoever they weren't just here for a bank loan. Maybe they had ties to something bigger, something Ravenstone didn't know it was a part of. The vault. It was as if everything in this place had led me here. People said it hadn't been opened since the day the bank shut down. If the answers were anywhere, they'd be inside. There it was, old money, scattered documents, and something much darker. This bank wasn't just serving the townsfolk. It was a money front, a laundromat for criminal dealing, stacks of money from foreign banks, fake passports. This wasn't a bank. This was a hub for something much more sinister. Ravenstone was being used as cover, hiding transactions nobody wanted out in the open. Each item painted a picture of a hidden network. How deep did it go, and how many people knew about it, but chose to stay silent? The last ledger was the most disturbing. It had names I recognized, people from the town, people I knew, but there were payments marked in odd places, unexplained amounts linked to local businesses, families. Were they blackmailed, involved, or just innocent victims caught up in something bigger? The implications were heavy. I felt like I was holding the town's darkest secrets in my hands. Ravenstone Bank wasn't just abandoned, it was buried, along with its story. Was it shut down to protect the town, or to protect those who used it? And who made the decision to seal it up and walk away? I wondered who knew. The mayor? The sheriff? If so, they'd all taken their secrets to the grave. And those who remained, would they let me reveal what I'd found? I stood outside the bank, looking back one last time. People say small towns are simple, peaceful, but Ravenstone was proof that secrets can run deeper than anyone wants to believe. I came looking for answers, but all I found were more questions. Questions no one would ever want answered. So I made it my goal to find the truth of the bank. So I went to interview Mrs. Evelyn Carter, a retired bank employee who's visibly nervous as she recalls her time working at the bank before its sudden closure. Mrs. Evelyn told, they used to say the bank was the safest place in town, but there were whispers. Late-night visitors, people I didn't recognize. They'd come in with suitcases, meet in the manager's office, and be gone before morning. Mrs. Carter had been silent for years, but I could see she knew more. The fear in her eyes wasn't just from memories. It was as if she was still afraid of someone who might still be watching. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just a rogue bank or a few corrupt officials. It was a sophisticated operation, with Langston as the puppet master. And anyone who got too close to the truth had reason to fear him. I went back into the bank's vault, searching through the remaining files. I discovers a hidden drawer with a list of names, Langston's inner circle. Langston's network stretched farther than I'd thought. Bank managers, local officials, even law enforcement, all in his pocket. Ravenstone wasn't just a small town with a crooked bank. It was a carefully constructed house of cards, with Langston holding all the cards. I found another note, a personal letter from Langston to Mr. Wallace, the former bank manager. The note said, "Keep your mouth shut, Wallace. Remember, your family's future depends on it. No one leaves this operation without consequences." Mr. Gray. Langston didn't just use threats. He used control, manipulation, and fear. He kept his people in line with promises of protection and the knowledge that crossing him meant ruin. I approach the mayor's office, where I confront Mayor Thompson, who's visibly uneasy. I showed him the letter. I know about Langston. I know about the money, the offshore accounts. You've been covering for him, haven't you? The mayor hesitated, then looks around as if expecting someone to walk in. Finally, he spoke. Langston, he's a force, Sam. You don't just go up against a man like him. He promised to make Ravenstone prosper if we played along. And anyone who resisted, they didn't last long. Mayor Thompson wasn't just a bystander. He was a willing accomplice, one who benefited from the scheme while Langston took the lion's share. They'd built a network that could only survive if everyone stayed silent. Mayor Thompson told me people wanted the good life, Sam. New schools, community centers. Langston promised it all, and he delivered. But we all had to pay a price. As I returned to the bank to continue my investigation, only to find a dark figure waiting for me. It's Arthur Langston, Mr. Gray, flanked by 2 bodyguards, standing in the shadow. Arthur Langston said, "Detective, you've been busy, haven't you? Digging where you shouldn't." Funny, I was just piecing together the story. And now, here you are. Saves me the trouble of tracking you down. Ravenstone is mine. Has been for decades. I own this town, its leaders, its secrets. I don't think you understand how things work around here. You could walk away, Sam. Turn a blind eye, just like everyone else. People do that here if they want to survive. What about those who don't? What about those who dare to stand up to you? Arthur Langston said, "They don't exist anymore, Detective. But you don't have to end up like them." I'd uncovered the truth, but now I faced the man behind it all. A man who controlled Ravenstone like a spider spinning his web, catching anyone who got too close. He returns to the bank late at night, knowing he's close to uncovering the entire operation, but sensing the risk involved. I pulls out my flashlight, illuminating the cobwebbed corridors as shadows dance eerily along the walls. I had come back here one last time. This place felt like it had a life of its own. Each step felt like walking into a trap. I knew I was being watched. I heard a sound, a faint echo of footsteps. I freeze, my flashlight flickering as I sense someone lurking in the darkness. "Show yourself." Silence. Suddenly, a dark figure moves behind me. I whirls around to see Arthur Langston, Mr. Gray, standing there with 2 henchmen. Langston's face is half hidden in shadow, and his eyes are cold and calculated. Arthur Langston says, "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you, Detective? Some secrets are meant to stay buried." "Your secrets belong to this town, Langston. You've controlled people with fear and threats long enough." Arthur Langston says, "Control is necessary, Detective. People are too weak to see the truth. They need someone to guide them, to show them the way." Langston signals to one of his men, who lunges toward me, attempting to restrain him. I fought back. The 2 of them locked in a fierce struggle as the other henchman moves in. I manages to knock one to the ground before the other pins him against the wall. Arthur Langston says, "You think you can save this town? Ravenstone belongs to me, and soon you won't even be a memory." Langston and his men drag me into the bank's basement, a cold, dimly lit area, filled with rusted equipment and shadows that seem to move on their own. The eerie atmosphere is thick with dread. The basement was a relic from another time, pipes hissing, walls damp with mold, and a silence that made my skin crawl. This was where Langston brought people who wouldn't stay silent. They bind me to a chair, and Langston circles me, taking pleasure in his helplessness. My breathing is heavy, the fear slowly creeping in. Arthur Langston says, "Do you know how many have sat where you're sitting? They all thought they were heroes, just like you, thought they could stop me, save this town. But here's the thing, Detective. Heroes don't last long in my world." He pulls out a pair of brass knuckles and puts them on, then stands close to me, my face contorted with a sinister smile. Arthur Langston says, "You can leave. Walk out of here. Never look back. But if you keep pushing, you'll end up like everyone else who's dared to get in my way." I said I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. Langston smirks, landing a hard punch that makes my head snap back. I spits blood, but remains defiant. I'd come too far to back down. Langston needed to be stopped. And if I didn't, no one would. As Langston steps away, I seizes the moment, kicking over the chair and rolling across the floor. Using broken glass from the basement's floor, I cuts his bindings. Langston's henchmen realize too late as I bolts up, grabbing an iron rod. A fight ensues, brutal and chaotic. I fought like a cornered animal, using whatever I can find. One by one, I took down Langston's men, leaving only Langston standing, his face twisted with rage. Arthur Langston says, "I underestimated you, Detective, but this ends here." We both faced, in the basement dimly lit, casting shadows almost nightmarish. After a brutal struggle, I overpowers Langston, pressing him against the wall. Your reign of terror is over. This town will finally know peace. I returned to the main floor of the bank, documents in hand, and begins exposing Langston's operations, his connections to key town officials, money laundering schemes, and decades of criminal dealings. The townspeople, now gathered outside the bank, watched me as I presented the evidence. Shock and anger rippled through the crowd as they realized the extent of Langston's control. I'd lifted the veil on Ravenstone's past, and the people were finally seeing the truth. Langston had ruled through fear, but now the town had found its voice. As I revealed the documents, some people in the crowd, including families of those who disappeared or were ruined by Langston, start whispering and sobbing, their faces a mix of fear and rage. I stand in front of the bank, battered but victorious. The townspeople, though relieved, are left with the scar of Langston's influence. The truth was out, but the wounds remained. Ravenstone would heal, but it would never forget. Ravenstone was free, but freedom came at a price. Some secrets once uncovered haunt a place forever.